Chapter 6 Sundown. After I finished riding for the day, it was close to sundown, and dinner would be ready soon down at Ideth. I looked forward to seeing Pauline and eating what she would cook and seeing her at dinner, and maybe I would see her after dinner. We might go for a long walk, maybe along the aqueduct. Then maybe we would go to her shack for the night, or stay at Ideth, or come back up here, if Margaret wouldn't knock the door down the next time she came by. The sun was going down over the piles and the forgotten works. They turned back far beyond memory and glowed in the sundown. Chapter 7 The Gentle Cricket. I went out and stood on the bridge for a while and looked down at the river below. It was 3 feet wide. There were a couple of statues standing in the water. One of them was my mother. She was a good woman. I made it 5 years ago. The other statue was a cricket. I did not make that one. Somebody else made it a long time ago in the time of the tigers. It is a very gentle statue. I like my bridge because it is made of all things, wood and the distant stones and gentle planks of watermelon sugar. I walked down to Ideth through a long, cool twilight that passed like a tunnel over me. I lost sight of Ideth when I passed into the piney woods, and the trees smelled cold and they were growing steadily darker. Chapter 8 Lighting the Bridges. I looked up through the pines and saw the evening star. It glowed a welcoming red from the sky, for that is the color of our stars here. They're always that color. I counted a second evening star on the opposite side of the sky, not as imposing, but just as beautiful as the one that arrived first. I came upon the real bridge and the abandoned bridge. They were side by side across a river. Trout were jumping in the river. A trout about 20 inches long jumped. I thought it was a rather nice fish. I knew I would remember it for a long time. I saw somebody coming up the road. It was old Chuck coming up from Ideth to light the lanterns on the real bridge and the abandoned bridge. He was walking slowly because he is a very old man. Some say that he is too old to light the bridges and that he should just stay down at Ideth and take it easy. But old Chuck likes to light the lanterns and come back in the morning and put them out. Old Chuck says that everybody should have something to do, and lighting those bridges is his thing to do. Charlie agrees with him. Let old Chuck light the bridges if he feels like it. It keeps him out of mischief. This is a kind of joke because old Chuck must be 90 years old if he's a day, and mischief is passed far beyond him, moving at the speed of decades. Old Chuck has bad eyes and did not see me until he was almost on top of me. I waited for him. Hello, Chuck, I said. Good evening, he said. I've come to light the bridges. How are you this evening? I've come to light the bridges. Beautiful evening, isn't it? Yes, I said. Lovely. Old Chuck went over to the abandoned bridge and took a 6-inch match out of his overalls and lit the lantern on the Ideth side of the bridge. The abandoned bridge has been that way since the time of the tigers. In those days, 2 tigers were trapped on the bridge and killed, and then the bridge was set on fire. The fire only destroyed part of the bridge. The bodies of the tigers fell into the river, and you can still see their bones lying on the bottom, in the sandy places and lodged in the rocks and scattered here and there. Small bones and rib bones and part of a skull. There's a statue in the river alongside the bones. It is a statue of somebody who was killed by the tigers a long time ago. Nobody knows who they were. They never repaired the bridge. Now is the abandoned bridge. There is a lantern at each end of the bridge. Old Chuck lights them every evening, though some people say he is too old. The real bridge is made entirely of pine. It is a covered bridge and always dark inside, like an ear. The lanterns are in the shape of faces. One face is that of a beautiful child. The other face is that of a trout. Old Chuck lit the lanterns with the long matches from his overalls. The lanterns on the abandoned bridge are tigers. I'll walk with you down to Ideth, I said. Oh no, old Chuck said. I'm too slow. You'll be late for dinner. What about you? I said. I've already eaten. Pauline gave me something to eat just before I left. What are we having for dinner? I said. No, old Chuck said, smiling. Pauline told me if I met you on the road not to tell you what the dinner is tonight. She made me promise. That's Pauline, I said. She made me promise, he said. Chapter 9. Death. It was about dark when I arrived at Death. The two evening stars were now shining side by side. The smaller one had moved over to the big one. They were very close now, almost touching, and then they went together and became one very large star. I don't know if things like that are fair or not. There were lights on down at Death. I watched them as I came down the hill out of the woods. They looked warm, calling, and cheery. Just before I arrived at Death, it changed. Death's like that, always changing. It's for the best. I walked up the stairs to the front porch and opened the door and went in. I walked across the living room towards the kitchen. There was nobody in the room. Nobody sitting on the couches along the river. That's where people usually gather in the room, or they stand in the trees by the big rocks, but there was nobody there either. There were many lanterns shining along the river and in the trees. It was very close to dinner. When I got on the other side of the room, I could smell something good coming out of the kitchen. I left the room and walked down the hall that follows beneath the river. I could hear the river above me flowing out of the living room. The river sounded fine. The hall was as dry as anything, and I could smell good things coming up the hall from the kitchen. Almost everybody was in the kitchen, that is, those who take their meals at Death. Charlie and Fred were talking about something. Pauline was just getting ready to serve dinner. Everybody was sitting down. She was happy to see me. "Hi, stranger," she said. "What's for dinner?" I said. "Stew," she said, "the way you like it." "Great," I said. She gave me a nice smile, and I sat down. Pauline was wearing a new dress, and I could see the pleasant outlines of her body. The dress had a low front, and I could see the delicate curve of her breasts. I was quite pleased by everything. The dress smelled sweet because it was made from watermelon sugar. "How's the book coming?" Charlie said. "Fine," I said. "Just fine." "I hope it's not about pine needles," he said. Pauline served me first. She gave me a great big helping of stew. Everybody was aware of me being served first and the size of the helping, and everybody smiled, for they knew what it meant, and they were happy for the thing that was going on. Most of them did not like Margaret anymore. Almost everybody thought that she had conspired with Inboyle and that gang of his, though there had never been any real evidence. "This stew really tastes good," Fred said. He put a big spoonful of stew in his mouth, almost spilling some on his overalls. Good," he repeated, and then said under his breath, "A lot better than carrots." Al almost heard him. He looked hard for a second over at Fred, but he didn't quite catch it because he relaxed then and said, "It certainly is, Fred." Pauline laughed slightly, for she had heard Fred's comment, and I gave her a look as if to say, "Don't laugh too hard, dearie. You know how Al is about his cooking." Pauline nodded understandingly. "Just as long as it isn't about pine needles," Charlie repeated, though a good 10 minutes had passed since he'd said anything, and that had been about pine needles too. Chapter 10. The Tigers. After dinner, Fred said that he would do the dishes. Pauline said, "Oh no," but Fred insisted by actually starting to clear the table. He picked up some spoons and plates, and that settled it. Charlie said that he thought he would go in the living room and sit by the river and smoke a pipe. Al yawned. The other guys said that they would do other things and went off to do them. And then old Chuck came in. "What took you so long?" Pauline said. "I decided to rest by the river. I fell asleep and had a dream about the tigers. I dreamt they were back again." "Sounds horrible," Pauline said. She shivered and kind of drew her shoulders in like a bird and put her hands on them. "No, it was all right," old Chuck said. He sat down in a chair. It took him a long time to sit down, and then it was as if the chair had grown him. He was in so close. "This time they were different," he said. "They played musical instruments and went for long walks in the moon. They stopped and played by the river. Their instruments looked nice. They sang, too. You remember how beautiful their voices were?" Pauline shivered again. "Yes," I said, "they had beautiful voices, but I never heard them singing." "Well, they were singing in my dream. I remember the music, but I can't remember the words. They were good songs, too, and there was nothing frightening about them. Perhaps I'm an old man," he said. No, they had beautiful voices, I said. I liked their songs, he said. Then I woke up and it was cold. I could see the lanterns on the bridges. Their songs were like the lanterns burning oil. I was a little worried about you, Pauline said. No, he said. I sat down in the grass and leaned up against a tree and fell asleep and had a long dream about the tigers, and they sang songs, but I can't remember the words. Their instruments were nice, too. They looked like the lanterns. Old Chuck's voice slowed down. His body kept relaxing until it seemed as if he had always been in that chair, his arms gently resting on watermelon sugar.